Hello, friends. Today I am joined by Amber O'Neal Johnston. She is an established authority on infusing diverse voices, culture, and a love for others into traditional homeschool curriculum. She's an author, speaker, and world schooling mama who shares her observations in various publications and as a coveted speaker at homeschooling, parenting, and education conferences. Amber lives in Atlanta, Georgia, nestled among pine trees, hammocks, and zip lines with her husband, Scott, and 4 children. And she shares about the beauty of a culturally and socially conscious home environment in her new book, A Place to Belong, a guide for families of all backgrounds to celebrate cultural heritage, diversity, and kinship while embracing inclusivity in the home and beyond. Amber, I am so glad that you are here with me again today. You're a repeat guest.
Yay. Thanks for having me back again.
Well, here at the beginning, I'll just say, if anyone wants to know more about you and your homeschool, your family, your journey with Charlotte Mason, they should go back and listen to our previous conversation, season 3, episode 9. That was a really delightful chat that we had. But today, in case someone is new to you, could you give us sort of the summary version, a little bit about your family and what homeschooling looks like in your home?
Sure. So I'm married to Scott and we live in Georgia outside of Atlanta. We have 4 kiddos. They are 12, 10, 8, and 6. The older 2 are girls, the younger 2 are boys. We've been homeschooling from the beginning, and our homeschool is based on the principles of Charlotte Mason. And I always like to say that in my home, Charlotte Mason wears an afro. So that basically just means that we use her principles and her method for education, but in terms of what we select within that philosophy, we really focus on things that are culturally relevant for our children. So that's a little bit about our homeschool. We like to have a general routine and flow through our day, trying not to have like a very hectic pace or be overscheduled. Sometimes we're better than others, but that's kind of what we do around here.
And remind me the general age range of your kiddos these days.
They are 6 to 12.
Okay.
Mhm.
My youngest is 6. He's about to turn 7. And I am noticing such a huge shift in my own homeschool. It's just so much different when the baby is entering those a little bit more independent. They're still little,
Yes.
but they can buckle themselves and fix themselves their own little snacks and things. And it just makes a huge difference to the homeschool day.
It really does. And I delight in his little phrases and the things that he's starting to say. And he really loves to participate in other things that we're doing. So I'm loving it. I'm relishing because I know he's my last. So I'm relishing every moment. But I'm enjoying the stage that he's in.
Yeah, sometimes I wish I could go back and homeschool my oldest ones with that same perspective of knowing how quickly it would pass.
Yeah.
But of course, we learn through these processes, right? So you
Yeah.
couldn't be that same mother again. Well, I am here to talk to you about your new book, A Place to Belong. And, congratulations on this accomplishment as a homeschooling mom, writing this book and getting it published. That's just really exciting. I love seeing other homeschool moms doing awesome things.
Well, thank you so much. Yeah, it was a huge sacrifice. That's probably understatement of the year, but it was definitely worth it. I'm very excited about it.
Well, could you tell us a little bit about your motivation for writing A Place to Belong and how and when the project kind of got started?
Yeah, sure. So I have been blogging for years, and talking about homeschooling and all different areas of our lives. And sometimes it was our travels or things we were doing with poetry or art or music and different books and lessons. And there was this kind of recurring theme throughout all of it, which was me constantly telling people it's okay to do things differently for your family. It's okay for you to sprinkle your special sauce all over your homeschool feast. And there were people that was really resonating with them, but they were asking me questions of things that I had gone over. And I'm like, oh, I blogged about that 2 years ago. Here, let me find it and link to it. And so I thought, wow, I've talked about all these things, but they're all very sporadically placed all around the internet in different podcast interviews and different blog posts and speaking engagements I'd had. So part of the motivation was to pull everything together into one place, and then put it in order so that people could see kind of more like what my philosophy is in terms of how to set a home atmosphere that really focuses on inclusivity. And so that was kind of well, that's what I was thinking, but I thought this would be something I would do when my kids were older. I'm like, I'll look back and I'll write this when they're off and I'm an empty nester or whatever. But as time would have it, I was approached by a publisher and things just took off from there. I was able to get an agent quickly up and running, and the book, got a book deal, and that's it. They were like, okay, off and write the book. So it's very different than I imagined. I must have been watching too many old movies or something. I thought we were going to sit down and have this like conversation in a meeting and all. They were like, okay, but write the book and then come back in 6 months and give it to us. And I was like, okay. So that's what I did. I kind of went away, and it didn't work at first because I was trying to write in the margins of my life and I didn't have the margins to write in. So my husband and I sat down and we ended up like rearranging our family schedules so that I could write.
That is awesome. And now here it's actually about to come and be in people's hands. It must be such an amazing, surreal experience.
It really is. It's so fun, and it's also really scary because it's kind of it's like a journal almost. Like you're basically saying, these are all of the things that I've done with my family. These are the reasons. This is the rationale. Here's my vision for where I think we could go and what it could be like for our children. And you're putting it all out there, and you're just like, oh my gosh, I hope that people hear my heart while they're reading and they're interested in this topic and respond favorably. So it's fun and nerve-wracking at the same time.
Yeah, I can't even imagine. I did get a chance to get a sneak peek at your book. And like I've already confessed to you, the realities of finite mom life mean that I haven't read it all cover to cover, but I was able to quickly read and bits and pieces here and there. And I really resonate with what you were just saying a minute ago, that you were taking these ideas you had already been communicating on the internet and sort of collating and combining them into this one unified whole, because I could recognize your voice as someone who's followed you on Instagram. And of course, we chatted previously on this podcast.
Yeah.
It felt like, oh yes, this is Amber. It's the same person I've been following, the same kinds of things, just more fleshed out and maybe aspects that I hadn't heard from you before. But if someone's thinking like, oh, I wonder if I would be interested in this book, I think just popping into your Instagram and reading some of your old posts would really give people that insight into who you are and what you are trying to communicate.
Definitely.
I wanted to ask you a couple questions about the book. So again, this was not from a close reading. This is not the book club podcast. We're going to be having like deep conversations about the book. Okay. But there were two things that I noticed that I wanted specifically to ask you about. And so the first thing that I noticed is it seems like you were very purposeful in keeping the audience of your book very broad, so that any family from any faith background or perspective could read A Place to Belong and find places of commonality or ways in which they could apply the things that you were discussing. And the other thing I noticed is that you repeatedly asked questions of your reader. And then at the end of at least most, if not all of the chapters, there were questions for the reader to then ask themselves or discuss in their families. And so it seems that you were really encouraging your readers, not here is the list of 20 rules that Amber thinks you need to follow, but think through the principles that guide the decisions for your unique family. Why are you doing the things and why are you thinking the things that you do and you think? And I noticed you repeatedly were rejecting extremes on either side and just encouraging a broadening as opposed to a narrowing of perspective. So you weren't saying throw out these things, do these things instead. It was really about an opening up. So those are just some impressions I got on my skim overview. And I would love to hear if you agree, if you think those are accurate, or, why you approached your topics in those ways.
Yeah, no, I would say that you're dead on in every case. In terms of, opening the door with a book and making it something that I felt could be relevant for a lot of people like me and people who are not like me. And that can mean so many different things. That means that I think it's something that dads can read and get a lot from, and not just moms. I think it's something that Black parents could read and get a lot from, and also white parents, and also other parents of color. So I was really intentional about that. And while I am a Christian, and there are a couple mentions in there because I mentioned stories about my life, it's not a book where I am proselytizing. It's where I'm inviting everyone. And I feel like that the things that I'm talking about are things that are important across faith backgrounds, and even my friends who don't follow a specific faith. And so I think that when our faith, is important, and the differentiation is really important on certain topics, and sometimes it is, then we need to focus on those topics. But in what I'm talking about, our love for our children and then their love for others is something that transcends and goes across. So I didn't want to narrow or exclude anyone. And then it was kind of like the whole point of the book is creating a place to belong for all of our children. So I was like, wow, if I'm a parent who can't create a place to belong for other parents, am I modeling what I'm talking about? So that was definitely true when you said that. And then in terms of asking questions, I really did want to ask people questions, the types of things that they can consider for themselves. And I didn't provide answers because everyone's answer is going to be different. And I think that a big part of my point is we don't all have to agree on everything. I think we all agree that we want the best for our children, that we care about our communities, that we want children who can extend themselves towards other people. And those are that's kind of like the premise of the book. And as long as we agree on those things, the other questions, I have opinions as Amber the mom, but I still can connect with you even if you think differently. So no answers to some of those types of questions, but they're just questions that say, you need to answer this for yourself so that you can create a vision for your home atmosphere.
I have found that I often learn just as much from moms, whether homeschool moms or not, but this is a homeschool podcast.
Yeah.
So from other homeschoolers who do things differently than I do, I often learn just as much from them as I do from people who do things the same way that I do. And so I think it can be helpful, even if you disagree with someone, to hear their point of view and to try to see the world from through their eyes, right? Or they sometimes will ask questions that are important questions that you didn't think to ask. And so it's so valuable to have a place where people of different perspectives can kind of ask questions and have these conversations, and not necessarily all agree, but that's part of the process of listening and learning and thinking, right?
Yeah, that's definitely it. And, the Julie Bogart wrote the foreword to the book, and it was so unplanned, but then she just had a book on critical thinking that came out a couple months before my book. And it was like we were both like, this is so perfect, because that's what I think is required, a lot of critical thinking for our children and for ourselves, for us to be able to come together. Because if we're only willing to hear from or connect with people who are just like us in whatever way that you define that, our worlds are going to be very limited.
Having an ability to think and have an ability to listen to other people is not the same thing as abandoning those uncompromised truths. You can have uncompromised truths while also listening in a loving way to other people.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, there are also those times where you can connect with something that someone else is going through that really doesn't even have anything to do with you. So you're hearing a story from someone, or you're listening to something that they're experiencing. And yes, they may be different than you in a lot of ways. Maybe there are things you guys don't agree on, but their story that they're sharing with you really isn't about you. It's about, sharing their experience and how they're processing things that are happening to them, or their experiences as they go through the world. And I feel like those are, again, ways that we connect as humans. There's like a sense of humanity that we all have some shared experiences. We have griefs and sorrows and joys and a desire to be seen and acknowledged, and all of these things that we all share.
Yeah. Learning to love our neighbor as
Yeah.
ourselves, right?
Yes.
Well, one of the things that you talk about a lot, and I have loved lots of your book recommendations, but you talk a lot about a commitment to life-giving books. You know, you hear the term like living books thrown around a lot, and you've given it a little bit of a tweak there, and I love it, life-giving books. And we did talk about that some in our past conversation. So definitely, again, go listen to that, go follow your Instagram and see what you've said about that. Read your book, you address that topic among others. So I did want to at least mention that because it's something I
Yes.
love about what you talk about. But I wanted to kind of look at another aspect of bringing life-giving things to our homeschools, because a lot of times we just sort of stop at the book list and think, oh, well, I've provided this wide array of colorful, diverse books. I'm done. I did a great
Yes.
job. Yay me.
Yeah.
But it's really important that we ensure other things like picture study, music study, other cultural experiences are also beautifully diverse and colorful. And so I wondered if you would talk a little bit about why that matters and maybe some practical tips for prioritizing that in our homeschools.
Sure. So my idea is that, we want this to be natural. So it might feel a little unnatural at first if it's something new, because I tell people, and that's okay. When I first started kind of switching my home atmosphere or, moving my home atmosphere towards this direction, it was almost like I stuck a piece of bubble gum onto the side of what I was doing because I didn't really know how to integrate it naturally. That was like my first step. But then over time, it became more natural. Well, if it's to be natural, then it should flow in all areas of our homes. So I always tell people when I'm describing the book, because they're expecting that I wrote a book about books. And I'm like, I do. I have 3 chapters about books. They're like, yeah. And I'm like, and I have 10 chapters that aren't about books at all, because they are just a part of our children's lives. And so when I talk in the book about the need for like cultural beauty, for us to do that with our own cultures and with others, and some of the things you named, poetry and music and art, and I talk about food and nature and just a lot of different things. I really am using that in a lot of ways to balance the hard history. So I don't think that we should shy away from age appropriately telling our children true history, what actually happened, and not demonizing or deifying anybody in the process, but just like, this is part of our children's story. Sometimes we separate it and, we say like, oh, well, we don't need to tell them about that. And I'm like, no, we do, because that's part of the story of man. And when we're telling our children hard history, we are, fallen humans, and we've done some pretty egregious things all over the globe. And it can be very heavy. It can be very hard. And I think it's important, but I don't want to just leave my children there. Like, okay, there's this tragedy, there's this trauma. It's really hard. It's not over, this is a lot to deal with. But I also want them to like sit with the beauty that all of these people that we're talking about that have done things and experienced things, that they have also created beautiful things, and that they are still creating beautiful things. And to me, those two can go hand in hand, and it allows us, the reason my home, we're able to dive into hard topics is because we also have so much beauty to get into. So I start with our culture and the music and art and creativity and things and the food and all of that within our own culture. And then we branch out from there. And that's kind of one of the ways that we get to know people. So like this too, so it works out really well for me. But, she talks about feast, spreading a feast and all that, but just the idea of feasting. So when we learn about other people, we do learn about like what are the typical foods that they eat, but then we learn about how they eat them. Like, what are they doing when they're eating? Is it celebratory? What type of experience is that? Where are they? Who are they with? And those types of things that have allowed us to get to know different people on a much deeper level. So I think that's kind of my heart behind that aspect.
And then again, it goes back to that whole idea of really loving other people, right? Really understanding. You can't love them truly unless you really understand all that makes them who they are. And so just sort of sitting with someone and learning something as, seemingly daily and mundane and ordinary as food. Really, I mean, I know that for me, there are foods that my grandma makes that I would eat that food every day. Like there are things that just it makes me happy. Like they're heart
Yes.
foods, right? They're
Yes. Yes.
really foods of your heart. And it's a very simple recipe. There's nothing super fancy about it, but it speaks to my heart. And so it's something that I have passed on to my kids. Like, you will eat this and you will experience it.
And you'll like it.
And you will like it. This is part of who you are.
Yes.
Right. And so for me, I really can understand that resonates with me a lot. Of course, you want to know about someone's food because that says a lot about them. Right.
Right. And then understanding that too helps when even, when I travel with my children, we always talk about it ahead of time. They know so much about it right now, but we had to practice. Like, you're going to be offered foods that you do not prefer to eat. And I will help you in those situations, because we've been in situations where I look at it and I'm like, as a family, we're not going to be able to consume this. But then other times I look at it, I'm like, you know what, we're going to try it. But either way, we are never, ever going to hurt the host by our reactions. So screwing up our faces or being like, ew, I don't like that. If we have a true dietary restriction, I don't make my kids like try to tell somebody that in another language or in another country, but I will explain that to them. But short of that, we will try it and we will take a little bit of it or a lot. A lot of times we end up loving it. And we're going to be kind and appreciative because we know that that is a love language. Sharing food that you love with other people, especially new people, is a form of hospitality, and we will not hurt them in that way. So I think like just those types of things of, teaching the children that they don't always come first, that their taste buds will survive, and that they're going to prioritize this person above their own comfort potentially in this little small way. And I just think those are like the types of lessons that we're really trying to get to.
This is a bit of a rabbit trail, but I just wanted to give a practical tip with that. I haven't been able to travel internationally with my kids. When I was a teenager, I did. And there was an experience I had where I got to eat a food that was very disturbing to me. And I ate it with a smile on my face and gratitude in my heart. Again, what you were saying, that love and care for my host. So I often will remind my kids of that story when we're sitting at our own dinner table and maybe there's a food that's not their favorite and it's just hard to like eat without making the faces. Yeah. And so sometimes we'll just all practice. I mean, nobody in my family likes squash. Okay. Yes. I don't like squash. Nobody does, but like at least once a year I make it because I feel like maybe this time we'll like it. Yeah. Maybe this recipe will be the magic recipe. It hasn't happened. Anyway, okay. So I'll be like, all right, everyone, let's practice putting this in our mouth and smiling while we eat it. It's just that, I'm not like torturing my children, making them eat bowls of squash. But yeah, sure. It's just that thing to remind them, like there will likely be a time when it is a way to show love to someone else, to eat something that you don't like with a smile on your face and not a grimace. So that you can practice that even at your own table, right?
Yes, it's so true. It is. And I mean, it's the perfect thing. It's still coming back to that hospitality. And I have told my kids that before, like, I'm your mother, but I'm also a person. And I prepared this meal lovingly. And the way that you're reacting right now is hurtful to me. And I'm not just making that up to teach them. It actually is hurtful, and I'm like, you're my kids and I'm your mom, but we are also separate people. And I don't think that you're treating me well right now. And so do you think that we could talk about this in a different way? And they kind of look and they're a little sheepish. They're like, we're sorry, mama. And I'm like, it's okay. But just remember that, I'm not a punching bag or just this like random thing that lives with you. I am a person. And so, yeah, you're right. You can practice that right at your own table.
And this just makes me excited because it's like full circle back to your book, A Place to Belong, because you start with the home, right? The unique family that we all are, that is, different combinations of people and cultures and backgrounds and experiences. Our own unique family is this place of care and love and belonging. And when we start there, it flows out
Yeah.
to the way we interact with those around us. I'm getting kind of goosebumps thinking about it. My kids make fun of me. They're like, Mom, you always get goosebumps. But, all right, I do. I just can't help it.
That's so funny. That's good. You have actual reaction to the things that you're feeling.
Yeah.
So that's good. Yeah, no, I think that's like a, really important part of the book because the beginning of some of the aspects of the book are rooted in my own story. And so what I have experienced is when I had a child who felt really poorly about the way that she looked or the way she showed up in the world, the way God made her, she was very unsettled about it. She also had a hard time connecting with other people. And I kind of just thought that was just the way she was going to be. But when we started shifting things and changing our home atmosphere in a way that allowed her to feel rooted and confident in who she is and the people that she comes from and who we are, amazingly, she started really being able to connect with other people really well, people that are like her, but also people who are completely different. And so I feel like I've since read a lot of research and other writing about how true that is. At the time, I didn't know that. I just saw it happening with her. And it makes perfect sense, though, because of two things. One, you just said, love your neighbor as yourself. If you have no concept of loving yourself, you don't know even what that feels like, then to tell you to love your neighbor in that same way that you've never experienced or something you've never done, you don't have that comparison. So I think she was able to see what I meant there, or what the word means there. And then the second thing was that she wasn't wasting so much of her energy focused on herself and how bad she was feeling or how left out she was or how unseen she felt. She's like, when she was good. And so when you're good, you have more energy to expend on relationships with other people. And so that became like kind of the foundation for the book, the idea that if our children, we water our children's roots and they grow deep roots within our home, that they will then be able to spread wide branches out towards other people. And that is where the whole, like the subtitle of the book is celebrating diversity and kinship in the home and beyond. So it's the uniqueness of others and ourselves in our home, and then so that we can have that kinship and relationship outside of the home. So that was it.
So it really isn't something that makes you more inward focused. Mm-hmm. It's something that actually equips you to be more outward focused as you have right. that stable foundation. Mm-hmm. And let's talk a little bit more about that here, because each of our families has our own unique story and heritage, those inside jokes, the things that make us uniquely like the Sloans or the Johnstons, like that family thing that just makes you you. So how can we encourage a love for our own kind of special family little culture, our own special family story?
Yeah, I give a bunch of ideas for that in the book, but just in general, there are some researchers and what they found was that children who have a strong sense of intergenerational self have a generally more positive attitude towards their families and are more hopeful towards life. And that intergenerational self, it sounds like really fancy, but then when I read it, I was like, oh, I got that. And so it's just the family storytelling. It's like the types of questions they ask were, do you know where your grandparents met? Do you know why your parents chose your name? Do you know any awards or things your parents were known for when they were in high school? Did your great grandpa serve in the military? I mean, they were just these simple things that are so simple that sometimes I think we forget to talk about them. And you can't just do it once. It's not like this one sit down, like the birds and the bees. Here's all the stuff about your family, but more, it's like a sense of ongoing storytelling throughout childhood. And I find that my children just love these stories. And so I've taken them to where Scott and I met, and then we got married in a different part of the state. So we've been there, and I'm like, we got married. We said, I do right here. My feet were right here. Or this is where Daddy proposed. Or, they know that my grandfather used to own a farm, and before he died, and we still have all those acres in our family, but he had hogs, and how he would complain that the grandchildren didn't want to eat the whole hog because he wanted the tail, the feet, the snout, and all of it gone. And we were all like, so I got you on the bacon, but and so like that makes my kids laugh. And, I tell them the stuff my grandfather used to say about my grandmother, and it kind of makes you blush a little, but it's just so sweet. He's just like, I just love her. And it's 70 years into marriage, and so I think that that's one of the first things that we can do to develop that intergenerational self with our kids, that family storytelling. There are also like family projects, and just a couple of examples. I give so many in the book, but the idea of making a family recipe book, and collecting recipes, like you mentioned your grandmother's recipe, collecting recipes from other family members. But even if you can't, make your own. Like, this is what we have on Fridays. We always do make your own pizza night, and we put these toppings on there. And if you can take some pictures, and you can make it into a Shutterfly book, or just print the pictures out old school and cut and paste into a little scrapbook or journal. It's not about how beautiful it looks, but it's the idea of showing your children that things that are, traditions within a family are important, whether the traditions you're able to capture from generations before, or the traditions that you're building and creating right now. Because I tell my kids, if you create this little recipe book, I'm going to keep it really safe. Your children and grandchildren will cherish this. So giving them a sense of legacy building, and as well as looking back, so I think those are the types of things that I'm looking for when I talk about rooting our children within our home. And that's also why so much of what I talk about is relevant for white families too. Some of my friends, they're like, well, you have so much music and food and all this, I'm just white. And I'm like, there's no such thing as just white. And I'm like, that's really like, don't ever say stuff like that in front of your children, especially. There's so much there. I'm like, you do have a culture. I see it. You might just not realize it. But for me, someone with a different, culture, I see your culture. We can talk about it. But it's not just ethnic culture. It is family culture as well. And we all have that.
Yeah. I like what you said about legacy building and encouraging your children to also be thinking about what they're building for the future generations. Because I could imagine someone's listening to that and thinking, it's a hurtful experience to think about their family of origin, and they don't have, fun stories to pass on to their children. And for that mom or dad who's listening, I hope that's an encouragement that they get to start fresh where they are and create that legacy with their kids, and think about this beautiful family culture that they're able to pass on to people they may not even ever meet.
Yes.
And then as a believer, I think about the history of the church across place and time. And for me, that is a big part of my family culture. Like, I think of church history, and when I read about people who may not look like me, who may have lived hundreds of years ago, but those people are my family. And so, that's another thing that you can find a family. My teenage daughter is big into like found family tropes in YA literature. So she's like, do you know a book where I can read about a found family? And I think, there's a sense in which we can, even if there is a family of origin that is more painful than something we want to pass on, we can find other ways to create that family culture for our kids.
So true. And I see that, I've shown that to my children in both ways, that families that we're kind of a part of unofficially, and people that are part of our family. So I have a really good friend named Kristen, and my children from day one have always called her Aunt Kristen. And so now that my little one, just the other day, he was like, is she really our aunt? And I was like, so I'll add that Kristen's white. And so he's kind of starting to put things, he was like, how is she our aunt? And I was like, well, Aunt Jules is your aunt. That's my brother's sister. And I was like, and she's white. And he was like, yeah, but Aunt Kristen's never around any other family. And I was like, well, the truth is that I love her so much like a sister, that when I was having a baby, we decided that my children would call her aunt, because that's the type of relationship that I knew you would have with her. And he was like, that's really cool, Mom. And so I think that there is that idea of, found family and creating family and framily, right? Friends who are family, and things like that. And I also, what you said previously about sometimes there is pain or trauma that you don't want to look back, and sometimes you can't. So my niece and nephew are both adopted. And so I can't necessarily sit with them and talk about all these things, particularly from their biological family, But I'm always talking about this now, and it shows up in that people often tell my niece how much she's like, oh my gosh, you're so much like your aunt. You guys look alike. You guys are always doing the same thing. And she told me one day, she said, I think people are lying because they always say we look alike and we're not biologically related. And I said, no, it's because you have our family ways. We're family though. And so they're not really looking just at genetics. What they see is that you move like us and you talk like us and you are a part of us. And so I think that there is still something to grasp onto, even when you don't have all of the information to go back in the traditional way.
Yeah. I'm blessed with 3 grandmothers. And so I remember one time my grandmother and grandfather, one of my grandmothers, were visiting church with my family when I was a child. And a friend was like, oh, I can tell she's your grandmother because you guys look so much alike. It was the same kind of thing. And it was sort of a little awkward. And she, my grandmother's like, I was like, well, I mean, we're not actually biologically related. And my grandmother was like, that's because we just love each other, and it was a really sweet moment to have that connection. And, it's not always about biology. A family is bigger than that, right?
It is. It is.
Well, this has been absolutely delightful. I will try to wrap things up so people aren't listening to a 2-hour conversation. I have all these other things I could ask.
I know. I feel like I could go on and on talking to you, right?
Right. That would be great. But instead, I'm going to move on and ask you the 2 questions I'm asking every guest this season. And the first is just, what are you personally reading lately?
Oh, wow. So this is going to be a little bit funny because people are probably like, haven't you already read this? So sitting here on my desk, I have For the Children's Sake and When Children Love to Learn, 2 like old school Charlotte Mason books. And the reason that I'm reading them again, because I like to stay fresh with remembering what it was that drew me to this type of education. And a lot of times if I don't do that, I can start getting into like the schedule and the books and the blah, 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 blah. That's not what drew me here. It was way up here, the ideas. And so sometimes I just revisit those and I need a break. I cannot just always be reading Charlotte's volumes. Don't tell on me, y'all. But sometimes I just want to read what people said about it. So yeah, that's what I'm reading right now. And then I'm always reading stuff with my kids too.
Yeah. For the Children's Sake might be the most referenced book on this podcast. I have joked that we need a drinking game and you could just binge the whole podcast. And every time you hear that, take a shot.
It's so true. And I like really hate being like everybody else. Like I like to look different. I like to say different stuff and be different. And then this one way I'm like, oh, I don't want to say it. I don't want to say it. It was this book, y'all. It was this book. So, it kind of is what it is, but I think it's good. It keeps me like just returning to it every so often. It keeps me, it prevents me from getting like mired down in the like day to day, but to keep me way up here at what really matters and what I was wanting to do in the very beginning.
Yeah, it's a classic because, it's valuable. When my younger brother was playing in a piano recital, he was playing for Elise. And I remember my mom like talking to the teacher, like, I mean, isn't there something else he should play? Like everybody plays for Elise. Yeah. And the teacher was like, everyone plays it because it's good. Like, okay, like, yes, you're right. Like, all right. Snap. Yeah. All right. Moving on.
Yeah, it's true. I know.
Finally, Amber, what would be your best tip for helping the homeschool day run smoothly?
Okay, so the biggest thing that I rely on for a smooth day is to remember that it does not all depend on me. My attitude is an important part of my family atmosphere, and definitely it impacts things. So my attitude does matter, but my finiteness, if that's a word, does not matter. And I am a guide. The Holy Spirit is the supreme educator, and I am here along for the ride with my kids. And so I don't have to take myself too seriously. And if we have a bad day, I did not fail. My kids did not fail. That's just life. And we're just going to get up tomorrow and hit it again. So I think setting good expectations and not thinking that you are the end all be all to your homeschool.
A good tip and a reminder I probably needed today in particular after my afternoon. So thank you for that reminder. We just need to like hear those true things over and over. Yeah. I don't know why I keep forgetting that.
It's so true.
Amber, where
True.
can
That's
people...
why we have to have friends. That's why we have to be in community.
Exactly. Amber, where can people find you all around the internet?
My website is heritagemom.com, and it's like treasure trove with all types of book lists and recommendations on all the things we talked about, the music, the poetry, the art, and all of that. You can learn more about my book on aplacetobelongbook.com. And I have some really great freebies for people who pre-order the book before May 17th. And you can find me on Instagram and Facebook at Heritage Mom Blog.
And I will have links to all those things in the show notes for this episode over at humilityanddoxology.com. Thanks so much, Amber.
Thank you.